So you want to learn how to write like Danny Elfman. Well, writing like Danny Elfman doesn't mean stealing his ideas. It doesn't mean copying his identity. Because Danny is Danny and you are you. But what you can do is gravitate towards certain things that Danny Elfman likes to do. So the goal is not to copy Danny Elfman, it's to be inspired by him. So when someone's listening to your music, they can say, that's inspired by Danny Elfman, and not saying you're a poor imitation. Hi, my name is Dylan DeRosa, and I'm a professional composer for film, TV, video games, and YouTube, funny enough. And I started from micro indie projects and worked my way up. And since the beginning of my career, I've been asked countless times to emulate the Danny Elfman sound. From my first feature film, Alien Baby, to quite recently a dark magical mystery album, Elfman inspired. And over the number of times I've been asked to write in the Elfman style, I have figured out a way, a method for myself to get quickly into that mindset of Danny Elfman. And in this video, I'm going to walk you through my findings to get into the Elfman sound quickly. Because once you understand the mindset of Elfman and the colors he uses, you'll start writing something that's inspired by him, but ultimately still sounds like you. At least, that's what they say anyway. Simply put, boiled down to one word: color. Elfman is a color. That's what Elfman is. He's not doing anything crazy or absurd. He's not doing anything complex. Yes, it may sound like that a lot of the times, but ultimately it's just color choices. And if you can get to the mindset of his color choices, you're going to jump into the Elfman sound quickly. But before we get there, this is the first step how I get into the Elfman color. Because people hear Danny Elfman's music and they think, oh, it's quirky, it's weird, it's dark, it's chaotic, because it's absurdity. And yeah, it's all those things. They're generally true. But underneath all that is a sprinkle of what I like to personally refer to as eerie loneliness. So you've got Danny Elfman, his quirky music with Pee-wee's Adventure. You've got Beetlejuice. You've got his dark mystery music with Darkman and Batman. I think through all this fantastical, magical mystery and darkness and chaotic absurdity, his quirkiness, everything comes from this eerie loneliness. And you can hear this throughout a lot of his projects. Most notably, Edward Scissorhands, Nightmare Before Christmas, Batman Returns. The Penguin music, it's lonely. The Penguin wants to belong. And to me, that's the first step of nailing the Elfman color, is getting to the mindset of Elfman. It's understanding that he has magical wonder, he has this dark atmosphere, he has this theatrical quirkiness to him, and just a sprinkle of eerie loneliness. And after you've narrowed in the Danny Elfman mindset, and the next step for achieving the Danny Elfman color is harmony. Simply put, is write in a minor key. I would bet that most every piece you hear from Elfman is in a minor key, because the man loves to write in the minor keys. And for the music theory people out there, if you want to write in a specific mode for Elfman, usually it's the Dorian mode. That is the minor key with the raised 6. So if we're in the key of C minor, C, D, E flat, F, G, A flat, B flat, C, then you need a raised 6. So you make that A flat and A natural. So C, D, E flat, F, G, A natural, B flat, and C. So there's your Dorian mode. Instead of giving that natural minor feel, with the raised 6, we can have C minor chord and a D minor chord. Or better yet, we could have the C minor chord and an F major chord. That minor 1 chord to that major 4 chord. That's what the raised 6 gives us in the Dorian mode, and that's a secret powerhouse of Elfman. What do I mean by this? Well, because we can bounce between the minor chord and the major chord. This is what gives it that push and that pull, because this is the most important part of the harmony of Elfman. Elfman loves to go from a minor chord to a major chord, or a major chord to a minor chord. Not that you have to do that every single time. If you're stuck on, I don't know where to go from here on the C minor chord, just choose a major chord. D major, or F major, or A flat major. 9 out of 10 times, that's what Elfman is going to do, is he's going to shift from a minor to a major, or a major to a minor, because that shift, that push and pull, is exactly what Elfman loves to do. This is what gives us that feeling of this darkness, maybe a little sad, but maybe playful as well. The quirkiness and theatrical feeling of it. Danny Elfman keeps it fairly simple with his harmony. He isn't doing any crazy chords someone like John Williams would do. The harmony is there just to support his color. It's just a color to him. And it doesn't need to be any harder than that. And the next step for achieving the Danny Elfman color is orchestration. So what are some dark colors of the orchestra? Well, let's think low instruments. But more interesting than that, we have the extended families. We have the auxiliary instruments. Let's take the flute. We have alto flutes and piccolo. What about oboe? We have English horn and bass oboe. Clarinets. We have bass clarinet and contrabass clarinet. And on the high register, we have E-flat clarinet. Trombones, we have bass trombones and contrabass trombones. We're starting to think about the extended family of the orchestra, because now we're not just thinking about low register and instruments when writing. We're starting to change the character and the sound of the orchestra more to the style and sound, the color of Elfman. And if I had to pick one family of the orchestra that really defines the sound of Elfman, it would have to be the woodwinds and him utilizing the extended woodwind family. Now, using this extended woodwind family, funny way to describe this that I've heard is circus music. And it kind of is true when you hear it, and the way Danny Elfman writes for it with the woodwind flares and the rips, it kind of does sound like circus music. And that's a fair way to describe it. If that's what gets you into the mindset of Elfman, then use it. Because these instruments and these extended woodwind families or extended brass, they perhaps give you a darker, more stranger, maybe even a more hollow sound. And that is the quirkiness of Elfman, is using those sounds. Let's show a couple examples utilizing these extended woodwinds. In this piece here, The Toymaker's Grave, we're going to showcase, instead of using perhaps an oboe and clarinet in octaves, for this piece in this range, I chose English horn and bass clarinet in octaves to play the melody. And this sound is already gravitating towards Elfman. Let's take a listen. So we got a quick understanding of using the extended woodwinds. Let's continue on with darker colors and move to a staple of Elfman, which is choir. We can't talk about Elfman-inspired music without talking about his use of choir. And I'm not talking about huge operatic cinematic choir. We're not talking about John Williams' Dual Fates choir. We're talking about something different here, where Elfman specifically likes to use low female choir. What do I mean by this? I mean low altos, low sopranos, and then use children choir in addition to that. A lot of the times he would use the low female choir as supporting harmony and the children's choir as the melody. And here's just a quick picture of Edward Scissorhands, the main title, showcasing exactly this, where the children's choir has the melody and the sopranos and altos support it. And honestly, this is no shock of Elfman using children's choir or boys choir in his pieces, because if you wrote a spooky Halloween track and you added boys choir, you have nailed the Danny Elfman sound. Most people are going to think it's an Elfman-inspired sound just by that combination. Case closed, video ending. And we're back. So why does Elfman like children's choir and this low female choir combination? This sound has more of a pure tone, less vibrato, more hollow, darker sound, not as bright in the higher ranges. But using children's choir more specifically gives us this feeling of a child's mind, magical mystery and curiosity. When we hear a children's choir, we start to think that hollow tone, colder sounding, darker, and maybe that sense of curiosity, a childlike mindset, which fits into our narrative of Elfman, darker colors, magical mystery. And here's an example of one of my pieces, Spindle Inspector, showcasing exactly this, because this is a great color to start nailing the Elfman sound. Let's take a listen. All right, let's keep going with our color and talk about the strings. And now that we're talking about darker colors, it doesn't have to just be instrument choices. It can be techniques and articulations. And the string family is a great showcase for this because Danny Elfman uses this all the time. So Danny Elfman would a lot of times take the string section in divisi, which means half and half. He would do half ordinary, meaning they're playing normal, and half sol ponticello. And sol ponticello means playing closer to the bridge on the string instruments. So sol ponticello gives us a more edgier sound, taking away from our standard orchestra tremolo sound, perhaps, or a standard legato sound. We're starting to transform the sound already. even though it's the same instrument. And so in combination, we are transforming the sound of the string section and really nailing in on our quirky absurdity and otherworldly sound that Elfman gets out of the orchestra. And here's an example from my piece, Glimmervale Apparitions, that takes half sol ponticello tremolos and half legato strings, using that same mythology that Elfman uses, splitting the sound of the strings half and half to achieve a different color. Let's take a listen. Now, before we wrap up this little color section of the family, I want to stress that studying a composer, your hero, perhaps Danny Elfman, is more than just studying Elfman's music, is you need to study who they inspire to be or who they are trying to emulate. And in Elfman's case, a lot of the times, if we stick to the film scoring world, he is trying to sound like Bernard Herrmann. Great composer and great at creating dark colors in the orchestra. All the same things we just talked about, Bernard Herrmann does in his scores. So if you want to really nail the Elfman sound, study Bernard Herrmann or other composers that Elfman tries to emulate, like Shostakovich or Prokofiev. Study Elfman's inspirations and you'll have a fast lane to getting to the Elfman sound. Let's move on to our next important factor of Elfman, forward momentum. Because one thing Danny Elfman is incredible at is creating movement through the orchestra, creating movement through his composition to keep everyone listening. How does Elfman create forward momentum in his pieces? Specifically, he loves to use the percussion section. We're talking celeste, harp, glockenspiel, vibraphone, tubular bells, piano, xylophone, anything in the percussion section to enhance the color. And he uses this section to create forward momentum. We're talking swaying back and forth on the chords. We're talking creating arpeggios, anything to create subtle movement to keep the listener engaged, especially while melodies are holding long notes or we're holding pads or, as some people call them, footballs on the score because there's nothing but whole notes on the score. That's where Elfman's creating movement using the percussion section. These instruments can keep the orchestra moving while the orchestra is sustaining notes. And keeping with our example, let's talk about Edward Scissorhands again, a great cue to just dive into the Elfman sound, the opening main titles of Edward Scissorhands. How does he start off the piece is with celeste, two celeste playing back and forth on the harmony, and that's all he's doing to create this kind of fantastical story time moment, and he's using percussion to create that. And percussion isn't the only thing to create forward momentum. There's the rest of the orchestra, of course. And Elfman likes to use woodwinds to create runs or little flourishes. Here's an example in Midnight Curiosities showing woodwind flourishes. Elfman also uses string ostinatos to help create movement or string runs. Here's an example from Midnight Curiosities just showing exactly this. Let's take a listen. And we can't forget the brass section as well. The brass can create forward momentum. Let's think of probably my favorite Danny Elfman theme is the Batman theme. There's your brass little flourish right there, creating forward momentum. Also giving you that question and answer, great writing. But that right there is forward momentum. It's creating these little flourishes from the winds to the brass, string ostinatos to keep everything going. This is how Danny Elfman creates a moving piece to keep the listener engaged. Or more famously, it's creating in the low orchestra using tubas and trombones, Oom-pah. Yes, I mean quirky theatrical music such as a famous movie that Elfman wrote the music for, Just Don't Say the Name 3 times. So let's get into the quirky theatrical, the most famous probably Elfman sound, which is kind of his Oom-pah kind of style, this stride style he does. Stride meaning stride piano. If we're in the key of C, then da, 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 just back and forth. Another part of the orchestra will do the off chords. Bum, 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 and they're just playing back and forth. That is the oompa I'm referring to from Danny Elfman. That is taking kind of this stride piano sound and pushing it to the orchestra. That's the quirkiness that Elfman loves to do. And on top of that fun oom-pah rhythm, you can add woodwind flourishes and string runs and add wacky doodle quirky sounds to it, like train whistles and slide whistles. The use of xylophone, maybe to create that kind of bone sound or little fun toy sound that, kids grew up playing. The use of box organ, something you would probably hear at a fairground or a carnival. Don't forget about Batman Returns, him doing just this. That is the quirkiness of Danny Elfman in that sort of style, is just having fun and really creating perhaps that kind of circus sound. Let's take a moment and listen to my piece, Mirthroot Hollow, that's doing exactly this, creating this cacophony of fun circus kind of sound music using an Elfman-inspired color. In this next section, I want to talk about transitions and modulations. Elfman is no stranger to modulating and transitioning, but he uses transitions not just to modulate and move the piece forward, because that's definitely true, but he's very dramatic about his transitions. Danny Elfman loves to create flair and drama in his transitions. He likes to make it known. You're listening to a piece and interrupt. We're going to transition and modulate. And how does he do this? Well, he loves to use tritone modulation. That is a tried and true method of Danny Elfman. A tritone modulation gives you this unstable interruption. It grabs the listener because it's not smooth. And that's what Danny Elfman loves to do, is to keep everyone listening using these tritone modulations, especially if we keep on top of our minor-major relations. So if we're in C minor, he might go to F sharp major. Or if we're in C major, he might go to F sharp minor and play back and forth between those. So here are a few examples showing tritone modulations and transitions, creating drama and flair and movement using tritones. Here's Midnight Curiosities. Here's Glimmervale Apparitions. Another thing besides tritone modulations is mediant relations. What do I mean by mediant? I mean the third relation. So if we're in the key of C, we're talking about E or E flat, or if we go down, A flat, mediant relations, a third away from the chord you're on. So these mediant relationships are less of a sudden jump or interruption to the listener, so we can help smoothly create modulations. A mediant relation keeps the listener engaged, but not a sudden jump that they're taken back from it. So not as much drama and flair. So when Danny Elfman needs to maybe tone it back a bit, this is what he'll do. Now, what I like to personally do to even make it smoother, because I like to try to do smooth transitions, is walking down the bass. What do I mean by this? In Twilight Riddles, in this transition, we land on A7. So A, C sharp, E, and G. So in the bass, we have A, and I want to go to F minor, which is a mediant jump. We're going from A to F minor. So I walk down A, G to F. And you can hear that clearly in Twilight Riddles. Take a listen. So Twilight Riddles is a good example of showcasing tritone and mediant relations. In this transition here, we're going to showcase both. Because why not do both? Why not make this transition big, dramatic, have all this flair, and throw in tritone and mediant relations? Because this is an Elfman kind of transition. This is drama. The point of these transitions is to move from point A to B, but give something to the listener to be excited about, something to be engaged, something to not click pause or click to the next track, something to just give them some dramatic flair. A lot of the Batman music and the Batman theme is just the same two motifs over and over, and he just keeps modulating and changing things to keep the listener engaged. That's all we're doing here, is creating dramatic flair to keep the listener engaged with our short idea. So in this section, we start in B flat minor. We then walk down the bass, because I love walking down the bass, smooth harmony. We go from B flat minor to D major over A. We then transition to D flat major over A flat. We then walk down to F sharp minor. We then jump to a mediant relation here to E flat major. So now we have F sharp minor, a minor chord, to a major chord, E flat major. This is a Danny Elfman kind of move. We then walk up to A minor over E. So now we're going from E flat major to a minor chord, major to minor, to A minor over E. So another Danny Elfmanism. And then we finish the last moment before we change keys to F sharp major. So we end on F sharp major over C, resolving to our new key of B minor. Now this moment right here is not particularly a Danny Elfman moment, going F sharp major over C. This is my kind of sound. But this whole movement transition still creates that dramatic flair and color that Danny likes. So this whole dramatic flair, this whole dramatic transition is just to get the key from B flat minor to B minor. We're just moving up a half step, and we went through this whole progression just to create some interest, some forward momentum, and give some drama to our listener. That is a Danny Elfman flair. That's how you can get into the Danny Elfman mindset, and the Danny Elfman color is creating some drama and flair in your transition. So let's put this whole thing together. If I'm trying to get into the Elfman mindset, because I've just been tasked to write an Elfman style inspired cue, this is what I'm going to think about. 1, get into the mindset of Danny Elfman. You want to be magical mystery, darkness, theatrical flair with a little sprinkle of eerie loneliness. That's your mindset before starting writing any note. 2, you want to start thinking color. So with harmony, you want to think minor keys, maybe experiment with the Dorian mode, and just really focus on a minor chord to a major chord to a minor chord. And the next step for achieving the Danny Elfman color is orchestration. Darker colors is what you're after. So use the extended woodwind family, low instruments, and articulations and techniques to help further enhance that darker color. 3, you want to create forward momentum, whether that's the use of percussion using celeste and harp or glockenspiel and bells or xylophone, any kind of mallet instrument, using percussion to create that movement while the rest of the orchestra is doing stuff, or by using string ostinatos, woodwind flares and flourishes and runs, brass rips and chromatic scales, create flair and fun. And if you need to nail the quirky sound, use the oom-pah. Use the stride piano kind of sound and push it to the orchestra. That's how you create forward momentum in the style of Elfman. And 4, lastly, transitions. Create big dramatic flair in the style of Elfman using tritone and mediant relations, and create a moment for your transition, not a simple get to A to B. Create an interruption, a moment for your listener to keep them engaged. So if you made it this far, I wanted to give you something that you can easily look at and come back to in order to nail the Elfman sound. Here are 4 Elfman starter templates. These are quick conductor scores that you can come back to and just copy exactly what's happening here with your own ideas and melody and chords. Remember, these are my ideas extracted from my knowledge of writing in the Elfman style for years and years. And I'm sharing these starter templates with you guys to help you launch yourself into the Elfman sound quicker. So our first template is what I like to call the Brooding Darkness. In this starter template color, what you'll be looking for is using low woodwinds, the auxiliary woodwinds here, using contrabass clarinet and bass clarinet and bassoons and contrabassoons, and creating low dark textures and chords with those instruments. You'll then use forward momentum with the percussion, celeste, harps, glockenspiel, and if you want to add some atmospheric air using some string chords and string harmonics up top to add some iciness, some coldness, some hollowness to the sound. That is what this template gives you. This is taken from the opening of Toy Maker's Grave. Template number 2 is the Elfman Forward Momentum. This is taken from Midnight Curiosities. This is your burst of energy walking through maybe a enchanted forest. This is the Elfman sound to get things moving, using strings and woodwinds to create this triplet feel of galloping and moving through your piece. Number 3 is the Elfman Quirkiness. This is your Oom-pah. This is taken from Mirthroot Hollow. This is quickly how to do that Oom-pah by using the tubas and trombones to create your Oom-pah, maybe doubled with the piano or anything else you want, using xylophone and flute to create your secondary theme, and using horns to bring it home. Template is actually extracted from Batman Returns, and I wanted to showcase this because although I didn't have a personal piece where I wrote this, because this is more of a film score technique, it's a very important thing that Danny Elfman likes to do. This is what I like to refer to as Danny Elfman's treading water. This is what he does time and time again in almost every film score he does to create some movement between ideas, between statements. When someone's maybe traveling or he just needs to fill in the gap, this is the Elfman treading water. And what's important about this template is creating very quiet movement in the strings, creating a low pad, a low drone. That's what he does with the contrabass here and the low synths. He creates movement in the percussion, forward momentum using the harp. The choir is less important here. These are just little accents that were probably in Batman Returns. You can feel free to use something like this idea or not. And the brass is there to create a little melodic movement, a little harmony. That's about it. But the most important part, and this is the Elfmanism, is the low woodwinds using the auxiliary woodwind, contrabass clarinet here, and the bassoon. Elfman creates this little rhythmic figure that he creates forward momentum with to keep the listener engaged, create that dark, quirky color using the extended woodwind contrabass clarinet. And this is what Danny Elfman likes to do when he's treading water, when he's trying to keep the listener engaged and needs to fill in those minutes of music before he gets to his next big statement. And after all that, the next step in the Elfman sound, the final step, which is the hardest step, is to write a catchy melody. Which, sorry, you're not going to be able to write a catchy Danny Elfman style melody because you aren't Danny Elfman. Danny is Danny and you are you. But write a catchy melody in your own way and just use the Elfman as a color. a color on your color palette for your compositions, and make the piece unique to you and inspired by Danny Elfman. That is what you're really after. Because we don't need another Danny Elfman, we want a new you. Because we're waiting to hear the next big composer, and it could be you. So go make some great music and use Danny Elfman as a color to help enhance your music. Hey, thank you so much for watching. I hope these videos help. If you're looking for more, please like, subscribe, and comment below. And if you want to see more videos, check in that corner there, and I'll see you next time.